with an ally with an acoustic guitar.
With an ally acoustic guitar playing Wonderwall.
The question is simply like, who do you run from first?
I know, right?
And they're the only people at the bar. It's like you're at the bar trying to enjoy yourself on like a Wednesday, and then those three people walk in. What is the first thing you do?
You run from the one that does CrossFit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Speaking of shows, just yesterday we had a very good time talking with filmmaker, I should say I had a very good time talking with filmmaker, punk rocker, Bill Cody, about his life in music, film, and politics. That show is part of a new series we're doing called Pop Life, where I'll be speaking about more pop culture subjects, telling stories, and of course, like any good TIR show, we discussed the unhoused on that one. Also, check the show we did Tuesday with longtime housing advocate Randy Shaw, discussing what the left gets right and wrong about housing. That said, if you enjoy what we do here at TIR and don't want to make the yearly or monthly commitment, you can show your support with revolutionary merch. And, you know, I think the faceless voice of reason, M. Toussaint, can do a better job at explaining this than I. Please welcome M. Toussaint.
Hello, hello. So good to be here, as always. But right now, we're talking about merch.
Oh,
look at that. Look at that.
Hey,
Get
we
your
got mugs over
t-shirts,
here.
get your mugs, represent with a mouse pad at work, let them know where you stand, start a conversation with an Anglo-pessimism t-shirt. It matches your Timbs.
Starter that shirt is. Like, that shirt is the ultimate conversation starter.
You can discuss your feelings with your fellow Anglos all around your pessimism. There you go.
And then wear a hat with symbols people don't understand.
We got snapbacks, definitely a conversation piece. Why is that flag upside down? You
And
better have an answer.
Just shrug your shoulders and just walk away.
That's a good enough answer as any.
Oh,
Hey. I love this one.
You know who has that one that wears it all the time?
Who?
Marcus.
Marcus
has the last zip up of that one that Bitter Lake took on tour. And then there's the Wu-Tang hoodie.
Killer Bee colorway.
Yeah, Killer Bees. Wu-Tang Killer Bees on the Swarm.
Mm-hmm. And the classic black and white.
The classic, the silver and black, which, you know, I was very hard for me to do because those are Raiders colors.
Spare me your California nonsense. Let's get back to my coast.
I hate the Raiders. Wu-Tang. Thanks for the children. Is YouTube going to see this as a gang sign?
Probably not. I think they're on board with the woo.
How much would that suck if they were on board with Wu-Tang and not like anything else we do on the show? Every show gets like Ben Burgess does a show here on Sundays, which is a philosophy show. It is literally the tamest thing that we do. And even that one gets flagged. It's like, hey, it's inappropriate.
Is it really? They're talking about nature.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
His philosophy show gets tagged.
Talking about Hume.
Dude, Hume is too much for YouTube. Speaking of Hume, let's bring in.
Okay. Speaking of mutton.
Did you like
okay.
that? Speaking of philosophers, maybe the greatest Black philosopher of our internet time. You may know him as the man of the Mau Mau Hour. I know him as the Black Hume. Please welcome Pascal Robert.
Peace and greens to the chat. Peace and greens to the audience. Peace and greens, Jason Miles. Relax with all that. Relax. Relax with all of that.
I was talking with a fan of the show today. This person had some things he wanted to discuss with me. Before he got off the call, he said, please let Pascal know he's still dope.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I'm honored.
So just so you know, even when I see people and they want to talk to me, they got to bring your black ass into it.
Oh, wow.
Here we go.
JB says, how about Black Rousseau?
The Black Rousseau, the Black Hume, all of these enlightened thinkers, Hume, Rousseau.
Mm-hmm. That's not your bag?
I don't know.
Pascal and Rousseau, passionate men. Passionate. Yeah.
I guess. Yes.
I like to think of Pascal as the Black Sonny Crockett.
Wow.
And I'm the Philip Michael Thomas with all the chest hair.
You know what it is? We're like Miami Vice.
Yeah, we're Miami Vice, but you're Sonny Crockett, and then I'm Philip Michael Thomas.
He's the name
really?
of the character, but you're the name of the actor. Good job.
What was Philip Michael Thomas's character's name? It was like black
Tibbs.
guy.
Isn't it Tibbs?
You said it was Tibbs?
Is that what it was?
You were over there getting him confused with Sidney Poitier.
I don't know.
And they call him Mr. Tibbs. Right in the middle of a drug bust.
Tubbs. I'm sorry, Tubbs.
Tubbs. Can you imagine him doing a Sidney Poitier impersonation in the middle of a drug bust?
Oh my God.
Miami Vice made selling drugs look so cool. I don't care what anybody says.
The wardrobe was off the chain.
Oh my goodness.
Ricardo Tubbs was his name.
His name was Ricardo Tubbs?
Yep. And he's an ex-NYPD officer from the Bronx who came to Miami seeking personal revenge against the person who killed his brother, Raphael Tubbs. Okay.
Wasn't his name?
So he was like a black Puerto Rican with S curl coming down.
Serious S curl.
They wanted to explain the hair, and so they gave him Latinx first name.
Like Sammy Davis Jr., black Puerto
Rican. I think our guest, I think Miami Vice might be before her time because I think she just Googled who the hell we're talking about. I think I can see her in the virtual green room going like, I don't know what the hell these people are talking about.
Miami Vice,
she's like, is this BET? She's like, what the hell is going on? Dr. Eric knows. He's getting in his mind. Right now, he's just hearing do 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 do.
I can hear it coming in the air of the night.
Whenever you heard that music and you saw them ride in the car and not talking, and I was like, oh, it's about to go down.
Ridiculous show.
I'm just getting ready because this show, oof.
Yeah.
I was writing the script. Toussaint goes, so if you guys don't know, Toussaint, picks a lot of these shows. These are all her ideas. So if you hate them, make sure you let her know.
Oh, that is a real cop out, man.
If you hate them, keep it to yourself. Suppress it until it becomes a festering mental illness, like the rest of us.
They
Don't
said
want to
fix Miami Vice.
I did not pick Miami Vice.
No. Someone says, "Oh, have AI generate the show topics." No. MT said, "Hey, let's do a show about this thing that's definitely going to get us demonetized." And I was like,
Yeah.
no. And then she said it again, and then it was on the third time that I was like, yes. That's
The
not true. I
people
think she said it
need
once.
to know. The people demand Doubleday and Osgood.
I like that.
What you talking about?
Why do we keep ignoring COVID? Many people feel like the mishandling of COVID was a major factor in Trump losing the 2020 presidential election to Joe Biden. Biden, the sensible, longtime politician, would listen to science and get the pandemic under control. Well, the question remains, are we back to normal? The death toll under Biden hasn't really slowed, but the news coverage has. No more does Democracy Now! Start the day with the daily COVID death toll. Wearing a mask is not just optional, but seen as the behavior of the overly paranoid. Should we still be cautious? As our guest writes about in one of her more recent Substack entries, the safety protocols at the Davos retreat of the elite were extremely high, using safety measures we don't have for the general public for fear of having a super spreader event. So the question remains, are we in the post-pandemic era? Or are we running around like children, covering our eyes, believing that if we can't see it, it doesn't exist? Let's discuss. Please welcome, coming all the way live from a secret bunker somewhere in the East Coast, journalist Julia Doubleday.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Sorry about the old people banter earlier.
I vaguely know about Miami Vice. You know, it's a thing.
I mean, do you know about that horrible movie with Jamie Foxx, or do you know about
that's the one I know about. Yeah.
If you don't know Philip Michael Thomas's taco meat chest tear and Jerry curl, then you don't know Miami Vice. Speaking of taco meat, our favorite doctor. So happy to see this man again and give him a great big hug in New York City. Please welcome everyone's favorite TV doctor. And now I can say that, and it's true, because he's always on TV with someone. Dr. Eric Osgood. Hey-oo.
Here.
Dr.
Nice
Eric.
to see everybody.
Thank you for coming out. We had fun. There's some pictures.
Yes. You know, a couple of people came up to me and said that they, really enjoyed, previous segments I was on your show, and I felt so cool, and that does not happen very often. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Did you hear that, Pascal?
I'm glad you got the chance to feel good. Dr. Osgood, feel good.
Well, now that we've got all that out of the way, guys, why don't we talk about long pandemic symptoms? Has the right been able to co-opt this discussion as a vaccine-related issue? Also, why is this still a politically polarizing issue?
You want me to start or you?
Yeah, go for it. I'm very eager to hear what you have to say, and then I'm happy to jump in.
Well, if we're going to talk about long COVID, I think the first thing we need to unpack is long COVID is real. I think that a lot of people are under the impression that long COVID is just this like vague set of symptoms, like maybe you're fatigued or maybe you forget your keys sometimes. And that's the way that it's really been presented to us in the press. But recently a study from the Brookings Institute, which you guys will know is like a very conservative think tank, found that nearly 20 million people are suffering from long COVID, and about 4 million of those are permanently out of the workforce because they're disabled long term. And they're not reporting on this because they care about human beings. They're reporting on this because they're getting concerned about the impact on the workforce. It's just not believable that millions and millions of people are suddenly simultaneously losing their minds and imagining they have a disease. That's not a realistic explanation for what's happening. And it's certainly not a more realistic explanation than there's a novel virus and we don't fully understand the impacts of it, which I don't know why that's so hard for people to accept, other than we've had 2 long years of propaganda that COVID is the flu. And we can get into why that's very much not the case. But I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Eric.
Sure. I really appreciate your comments there. I have been working with patients with this syndrome now. Uh-oh, you only seeing my forehead, or is that just my screen? Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, I've been working with patients with this syndrome and doing research into this syndrome for the past couple of years now. And it is absolutely true that it is real. And I think another thing that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle is that this is not unprecedented or completely novel, in that we already know that pathogens such as viruses can do this. I think we're seeing it at an extremely sort of accelerated rate, and it's more in the forefront because it's a pandemic. It's affecting many people. We're paying close attention to it, but also this seems to be a virus that's particularly good at doing this. And despite what you might read in, more libertarian leaning outlets, or in something like the New Republic, unfortunately, despite what you might read in sources like that, there is absolutely very high quality data, information, scientific evidence that's been building over the last couple of years, and we understand pretty well at this point why this syndrome occurs. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but there are sort of conflicting primary drivers of what predominantly drives these symptoms in people. But we have a very good idea of at least what some of the clinical subtypes of this syndrome, this disease, are. And finally, we're starting to see an acceleration and launch of therapeutic clinical trials to try to actually demonstrate what might be able to benefit some of these patients. However, it's very unlikely that any time in the near future there's going to be anything close to a cure or even a very highly efficacious treatment. But and so I mean, the primary thing that you want to do to mitigate your risk of ending up with this syndrome is trying not to get the virus, particularly not numerous times over and over and over again. And because the new variants are becoming more contagious, and we are increasingly dropping the measures that we're taking to try to mitigate spread, we're seeing upticks. And for a little while, we were getting little droughts where we weren't really seeing too much more influx of patients into our long COVID clinics. But more recently, there's been another huge uptick in new patients presenting with these post-acute sequelae, and then people who had it previously, gotten a bit better, were doing well, now presenting with re-exacerbations, ostensibly because they got reinfected again. And so that's a big problem. And I think, there's always going to be this sort of, it's very reminiscent to me of the whole merchants of doubt phenomenon, when there's always people who are going to be skilled at doing scientific propaganda, whether it's that tobacco smoke doesn't cause cancer, or, climate change denial. There's always going to be clever scientific jargon to try to obscure certain realities when they're economically inconvenient to those who hold power. And that's what a lot of this denialism to me reeks of and kind of reminds me of. And it's pretty unfortunate.
Do you think that any of the actual skepticism that is being brought forth by not only elements of those on the right, but even some segments of the left, is due to the inability of the actual healthcare industry to effectively have communicated with the public about the precautions of what needed to be done to protect from COVID, and even some of the statements that were being made about the vaccines that were kind of questionable in terms of their veracity, led to a pretty much an atmosphere of distrust? Do you think that was part of the problem?
I think that's a big part of it. And it's interesting because the sort of dynamics, especially if you're kind of paying attention to some of the online Twitter type banter within the medical and scientific community, it's like earlier on you had this sort of like the COVIDians and the COVIDiots. You had the people who were telling people that, just take vitamin D, or, you're not at risk unless you're elderly and immunocompromised, or take hydroxychloroquine or whatever else. Don't get vaccinated, XYZ type people. And they had the people, and that typically went hand in hand with like anti-mask sentiment. And then you had the people who were like, yeah, masks are good, vaccines are good, there are treatments that were potentially promising early on, but have shown to be efficacious. And that was sort of like the split that you would see. And now it's gotten a bit more complicated, because now within the people who are not really conspiratorial necessarily, or sort of pushing blatantly anti-science things, there's sort of a rift there where you have a faction that's like, hey, look, these vaccines work so well that, and long COVID's not a real thing. We don't think it's just one of these sort of functional disorders, and as long as you're vaccinated up to the current recommendations, you're at such low risk of severe disease that, hey, like, the vaccine's enough. We don't need additional measures of protection. We should be dropping mask mandates. Everything should go back to normal, and we're all kind of fine.
Oh, deep state. The deep state got him.
That was
They got him.
They got him.
Well, if I can just jump onto what he was saying, I mean, the reality is the Biden administration has the exact same goals as the Trump administration had, which is to get everyone back to normal, to get capitalism, the wheels of the machine turning, and to get everyone to stop complaining to them. So when you advance, whether you're advancing this idea that the vaccine has fixed all of our problems, even though 500 to 600 people are dying daily, and the majority of them are vaccinated, whether you're advancing that or whether you're advancing anti-vaccine conspiracy, that the vaccine is killing all these people, both of those narratives are convenient to the state. As leftists, you should be questioning when your narrative is convenient to the state. What do I mean by that? I mean, the state does not have to intervene or do shit if it's the vaccine or if the vaccine is perfect. Neither of those things are true. But when you go around advancing that, oh, people are just being harmed by the vaccine, it's not COVID, it couldn't possibly be this novel disease that's killed millions and millions of people that's harming us. When you advance that, you're giving Biden a free pass. So I don't like to give this administration a free pass for the millions of deaths. I mean, at this point, we've seen over 700,000 deaths on his watch and millions of people disabled on his watch. And you have people on the left who are either saying that's no big deal, or even who are turning into anti-vaxxers. And like, as leftists, we need to question these narratives and question why we're not challenging the state and asking them to actually address this problem, which is what we elected them to do.
Well, let me ask you this question, and I ask this to everybody here. Does it feel like when we talk about science exists, and Dr. Eric, I would love to get your, opinion on this and your feeling on this. We're constantly experimenting to see if what we're saying is true, but it feels like science lives in this world of absolutes. So I remember early on it was, well, wearing a mask is silly because you have to have a certain type of mask, and if you don't have the certain type of mask, then you're wasting your time. And then it was, oh, everyone has to have an N95. Then no, you just need some sort of mask covering. Then it's the vaccine's effective. No, the vaccine's kind of effective. Now we have a new virus. So it feels like people don't trust science because the way we view science from kind of a layperson's perspective is once a scientist says it, then it's an absolute truth. There's no wavering. We never experiment to test these theories. You're a doctor. You deal with this every day. I've had personal conversations with you about this. But how is it for someone trying to treat this when someone comes in that's either denying it or they don't trust you?
Yeah.
How do you build trust in this environment?
That's a fantastic question. And it's something I have spent a lot of time talking about. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened with me on my stream. I got dropped earlier in the middle of my sentence. I apologize. Building trust with patients, especially, I mean, to answer kind of the first part of your question, I think a lot of mainstream media really sort of polarizes science and turns it into the system of absolutes because it always becomes about sort of demonizing the other. And so you're going to have Rachel Maddow basically telling you if you don't believe XYZ, what the current consensus is based on, what's just been put out here, you're one of those deplorable bad people. And then you're going to have Tucker Carlson on the other end telling you that, if you believe what, Anthony Fauci's telling you, then you're some kind of sucker. It's like this, it's become just all sort of polemics when the reality is like, scientific consensus changes and it shifts, and the idea is that we're supposed to be basing what we say off of the current best evidence that we have and try to build some kind of scientific consensus. And then that turns into public health communication, where you have to try to appropriately communicate that. And as new information rolls in, do our best to update that. And unfortunately, when science is communicated so frequently in this sort of polemic sort of way, it becomes hard to do that, especially when you are imposing things on people, when you're imposing things like restrictions or telling people they have to wear a mask or that they can't go and dine in their restaurant, whatever it is, people are going to kind of become, understandably to some respects, sort of reactionary about that. And so I think when we, to build trust, we have to be very straightforward with people, with what we know, how certain we are in what we know, and then as we get new information that sometimes overrides what we thought before, or often situations change and evolve, we have to be able to sort of update that in a manner that's sort of non-judgmental and that just sort of plainly states what we know, what we understand, why we think it, and be straightforward when we maybe either got it wrong or it's just not up to date, something changes. Now, when you're dealing with people who are non-trustful, and that I actually spent a lot of time, like early, mid, even late 2021, doing consults with people who were really afraid to get the vaccine. They were consuming a lot of media, particularly social media, that was feeding them a lot of very poor information, but they were very untrustworthy of either their own doctors or, sort of mainstream scientific communication, just because of everything they were reading. And they wanted to speak to somebody that would actually spend a little bit of time dispelling some of their fears and helping them come to that decision. So a lot of people, I know, they get sort of painted into this bad guy anti-vax box. There are a lot of people, though, that they wanted to do the right thing for themselves and for their families, their kids, but they needed a little bit of their hand held, and they needed somebody to sit down and explain it to them in a non-judgmental way, and really just show kind of empathy and genuine concern for the person, and be able to do that in a manner that's not condescending and not judgmental. And that, I think, is the biggest problem. I think that's where a lot of people who otherwise do really good work when it comes to scientific and medical communication fail, because they do get very judgy, very sort of condescending and mocking. And I think that what that ends up doing is you take people who are very prone either to sort of conspiratorial content or just people who want to sort of play into their fears. And you're really, and I've said this on multiple occasions, you're really driving those people into the arms of people like that. We know who those people are. And I think whether we're talking people on the left and the way that we communicate, or some of the people that are the more sort of prominent voices, in sort of what I would call the pro-science movement, I think we need to get a little bit better about being a bit non-judgmental with actual people, with patients. I understand kind of going after people that are the purveyors of misinformation, because they're getting people killed. They a lot of times don't know what they're talking about. They're doing absolute nonsense content, but they are effective enough in the way they communicate that they're actually causing people to change their behaviors and to act in ways that are going to get them hurt, potentially killed, or sort of long-term disabled. I don't have any patience for that. I'm not going to pull any punches with people that do that kind of stuff. But with actual patients and members of the public that have, in my opinion, understandable fears and reservations and doubts, and to some degree skepticism of sort of scientific mainstream communication, I just think being non-judgmental and understanding and patient are the most important things that you can do.
One of the questions I want to ask you, though, is that when we have a privatized healthcare system, we have corporations and companies that produce things like the vaccine that are also demonstrating conflicts of interest because of other investments that they may have. Yeah. How exactly is it possible for even a rational thinking citizen to have any kind of trust whatsoever when we have a history of these kind of corporations in a kind of capitalist healthcare system being not only dangerous, but working towards the complete opposite interest of the body politic? So is it actually natural that in a society where we have these type of for-profit mechanisms that drive the healthcare industry, that people develop a certain type of skepticism?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of refocus people's like, if you're going to have a problem with, the sort of big pharma apparatus, have a problem with the fact that they have withheld these interventions from lower income countries, or have tried to jack prices up on them, not in the actual, purveying of these interventions. Like, out of all the sort of biologically active products and chemicals that drug companies put out, vaccines are one of the very few, not very few, but one of the few things that work extremely well and are among, by far the safest interventions that we have. Number two, the data that's coming out that's being published in high impact, reputable medical journals, this is not information that's being put out by drug companies. This is being put out by non-conflict of interest having academic institutions that are studying these things that don't have any vested interest one way or another that are putting the information out that's out there now. So it's not that you would necessarily be expected to trust, the people that stand to gain in extremely powerful positions within the pharmaceutical industry, but it's actually members of the academic scientific community that are putting out the information that we have now. That's an important distinction to draw when you're communicating these things.
One of the things that I find interesting is that while some of the regular people may need some hand-holding, others don't. Like financial journalists don't seem to need that. Can you speak to that, Julia?
Yeah, so I think you're alluding to this piece I wrote about my frustrations with seeing that the left press, aka these outlets like Jacobin or Current Affairs, they're not covering COVID anymore. And this is, to be clear, a mass death event like nothing we've seen in a century. It's killing disabled people. It's killing vaccinated people. It's a mass death event. And it's something that every single leftist outlet should be on the front lines of, pushing back on the murderous non-response of the Biden administration. They're not doing that. They're not saying shit. And their silence is very, very loud. That's my cat, sorry. But in terms of where I found good reporting, I actually sort of drew this contrast in the wake of that awful New Republic piece where this author basically, tried to both sides along COVID and say, but like maybe it's all in people's heads, which again, this is millions and millions of people. And we're talking about 4 million people out of the workforce in the US alone, which the Brookings Institute is upset about. So like, we know these people are not like faking to lose their jobs and lose their houses. Like it's a real disease. I was looking for good coverage of long COVID. And one thing that I found very mysterious was that for months, I found myself sharing links from outlets I don't usually read. So like Financial Times, Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, but like the business section, CNBC, it's all of these business outlets were talking about COVID. So in my article, I delved into essentially, the reason these people are on the front lines of reporting about long COVID is they're worried about losing money. They're worried about the long-term effects on the workforce, and they can see what's coming. And they are not buying into this Biden administration bullshit that it's not going to be a big deal because their job is to figure out what's going to happen to the economy. And it's very disturbing to me that these people have the foresight to sort of see this in the numbers. And you'll also see actuaries producing a lot of good data about, the excess deaths that are attributable to COVID. And meanwhile, the left is it's nowhere to be found. It's back to normal, back to brunch. And I do think to a great degree, that's essentially just denial. I mean, people, I went through it myself. I got vaccinated. I went back to normal. I took my mask off. I was like, this problem is solved. And then, Omicron hit. 200,000 people died in 8 weeks and 40% of them were vaccinated. Well, Joe fucking Biden told us that it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. That wasn't true. The vaccine is losing efficacy because we're allowing unchecked spread. And unchecked spread leads to infinite opportunities for this virus to mutate and become more vaccine resistant. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. It's important to get vaccinated. But not communicating the ways in which the vaccine is not keeping up with this really fast mutation that's happening is creating anti-vaxxers. Because, by the way, we can talk all day about being nice to anti-vaxxers and all this stuff, but we're also gaslighting them. I look on Twitter and I see people saying over and over again, well, the vaccines were never expected to prevent infection. Well, Rochelle Walensky went on TV in March 2021 and she said vaccinated people will not spread COVID. And you can Google that and you can see it. So lying to people is not effective. We need to be honest with people. And the honest truth is when we first got vaccinated, the vaccines were more effective than they are now. And the reason they're getting less effective is that unchecked spread leads to mutation, leads to variants, and leads to vaccine resistance. Not talking about that is lying to the public.
Is there something to be said, Julia, about a certain aspect of the left that is not based in what the working class looks like today, right? So people that work in gig jobs that are doing Uber rides and food delivery service and, you know, the service industry, you know. So if you work from home, you probably feel a lot safer than the cat
People,
that's still driving
yeah,
an Uber.
people who are working class are on the front lines of this, and people who are working class, people who are on the front lines are dying. They're dying at much higher rates. They're becoming disabled at much higher rates than people who are working from home. And, you know, it's sort of it's an unfair question to put to people like, oh, well, you know, I don't know if workers really care about this because they're just trying to, you know, make their money. Yeah, that's true of people who work in big oil. It's true when people need to struggle every day to have their needs met, they're not always going to be concerned with things that are long-term and major issues that require years and years of organizing. Like they just want to go to work and make their money. And I get that. That makes sense. But we also need to be pushing back with communications about what can be done. One of the things that can be done is that every workplace needs to have high quality ventilation. I'm talking about less than 800 parts per million CO2. That should be in every workplace, just like we have clean water, just like we have clean food. You're entitled to clean air. You're entitled to that. And I'm not your enemy wanting you to go to work and not get sick. I'm your friend. I'm your ally. I want you to have that right. And I want you to be able to sue your motherfucking boss if they get you sick over and over again and disable you.
Right.
Julia said, I'm allowed to.
Julia said, but seriously, if I remember reading so many think pieces in even local publications in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm from, about the devastating effects that certain communities were having, how it was hitting the Latin community in the Mission District of San Francisco, where you have multi-generational families, and people with, you know, all kinds of pre-existing health conditions. Those pieces are gone. We no longer talk about this pandemic and how it is affecting the real working class.
Right.
There is kind of a back to brunch, back to travel mentality with a lot of people. I'm not going to lie. I flew to New York for the live show we did with no mask on. I totally forgot it. Yeah, it's a little different here where I live. I live pretty secluded from you scary Americans. Coughing all over the place with your big green boogers. See? She wiped her nose.
Oh, God.
No, but you know, you made a good point, Jason, because it is we're talking about the most vulnerable people that are predominantly being affected right now, immunocompromised, elderly, and then members of disadvantaged communities. And I think it speaks to, you know, the so-called urgency of normal, back to the normal aesthetic without the mask, no real drive to provide that high quality ventilation, no drive to do universal widespread distribution of N95 stuff to households across America, any of the very basic things that could be done. That speaks to the power of capitalism, because that's really not convenient. As far if from that sort of capitalist mentality, that's not what you're going to be looking into, and you have to make a strong case for it. And of course, early on when we were talking about, you know, crushing the curve, staying under the curve, avoiding the overwhelming of American hospitals, etc. Now that we're not really in that phase, so I mean, close to 1,000 people died in the United States of COVID yesterday, one day, 7-day average around like 400 something. But you spread that across the whole country, it's really the most sort of underprivileged and most vulnerable among our society. I guess the United States as a society and this administration has deprioritized that. And I think I appreciate Julia's advocacy on this from a left perspective, that it is shameful that the left writ large has not been more vocal and sort of unified and outraged about this, because to me that does go very hand in hand with left values. And I do find it to be to be very disappointing. And again, I've spent many hours every week working with people with this chronic COVID. Sometimes people use the term long COVID, chronic COVID, post-acute sequelae, and people that have been members of the workforce their whole lives, never had any problems, never had sick days, healthy, now to the point when they can't even work. They want to work, they can't. Their brain feels so foggy, they're so fatigued, they don't have the ability to go to work. And the fact, as you pointed out, that the actual financial powers that be are starting to take notice of this and get concerned is very, very telling.
What can you tell us? Sorry, go ahead, actually.
The question I want to ask is that what exactly is allowing the politicization to continue, particularly on the right, where they're still delegitimizing the attempts to try to get this under control, to the point where Biden is basically saying COVID is over. I saw a video of him literally come out and say, well, listen, COVID is over and everything is fine.
He just said that he's ending the pandemic emergency, which is going to throw millions of people off of Medicaid. And it's not just coming from the right wing. That's the thing, is that I think Biden's gotten away with a lot more than Trump could get away with. He is overseen over 700,000 deaths with very little pushback. You know, when 100,000 people had died in the US, in the New York Times, the front page was 100,000 people dead, incalculable loss, and it listed all of their names. When Biden got into office, he did this, crocodile tear ceremony at the National Mall about how sad he was that 400,000 people died and they were never honored by Trump. Now he's killed almost twice that many people. And is he talking about it? Not only is he not talking about it, the other day at his press conference, he said he forgets about it. He said, over 1 million people have died, and sometimes, it's just so many people, and I just forget about it because I don't think about it anymore. He said the words, I don't think about it anymore. And that wasn't front page news. And so I think it's a combination between this administration. They went all in on one strategy. Their one strategy was, we give people the vaccine, we're done, baby. We're not doing anything else. No more checks. You're going back to the office. We don't care. And then when that strategy did not work and hundreds of people continue to die daily, they just doubled down, and the media did not hold them accountable. The media has just continued to move the goalposts of normal, so that when we first were talking about going back to the office and going back to normal, it was like, if you're vaccinated, you're going to be fine. You're not going to die. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. And now it's like, yeah, you might get a disabling illness. You're going to get this thing twice, maybe 3 times a year. Your kids are going to get it every year. And by the way, 500 people are just going to die every day forever. But that's cool now, right? Okay, get back in the office. I mean, none of this is okay. And it's really, to my mind, it's not surprising the New York Times and the Washington Post go along with this kind of bullshit. But the fact that the left isn't there to create that accountability and push back on it's just a huge missed opportunity, man. I mean, we should be on the front lines of this. We should be the ones that are defending disabled people, not getting into fights with disabled people. I mean, come on, this is a marginalized group that's getting murdered by the state. And
Uh-oh.
Oh no, deep state.
You know why?
Oh, the deep state cut her off.
She wanted to get in a fight with a disabled person. That's why.
Started talking about Biden.
That's what did it.
That's what did it. She's over there, pushing people in wheelchairs the wrong way. It's like, hey, bully.
I have some very exciting news, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Sure.
We thankfully we have the funding, and our clinical trial, which is going to be a multi-centered, double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trial for a combination of 2 medications that we're going to use to try to treat people that have post-acute sequelae. So people, long COVID, whatever you want to call it, who have not been able to get better. There have been different treatments people have been trying. We had a case series that was recently accepted for publication into a major journal. We finally got our stuff together. It's been a challenge, and we've got some really reputable institutions that are going to be trial sites. We've been working with FDA to make sure they are going to get what they need, and we'll see how the clinical trial goes. And if things go well, we may have a treatment on the horizon. So that's very exciting. And my group has been involved in this research now going back a couple of years, and I'm really excited about this milestone of finally getting our clinical trial off the ground.
That is fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, I have a question about one of the symptoms. So it sounds like Joe Biden has some brain fog. He probably has it not due to COVID, though.
Come on,
Can
man.
you tell us about that as a symptom? Because I feel like a lot of particularly young people are suffering from it right now.
Absolutely.
I mean myself. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, brain fog is a tough one, and there are a few different theories about why this happens. There's a theory that involves neuroinflammation, so inflammation of the brain. There's a theory that involves the potential residual presence of viral proteins within the circulation within the brain that causes issues with the perfusion and delivery of oxygen to tissue within the brain. So there's different theories behind why this happens. And it's a challenge because when you have brain fog and you're either at work, you're trying to carry out executive tasks, you're trying to complete complex tasks, whether at home or the workplace, it can be extremely debilitating. Brain fog is something that's been described historically in conditions like MECFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, but also as sometimes as an aura symptom of migraine. And it can be an extremely debilitating symptom. And sometimes people hear it and they kind of roll their eyes, brain fog, what's that supposed to mean? But it's people who've experienced it. It's a very consistent, very well described symptom. And in my experience in treating this people with this symptom in particular, and we've been doing some pretty advanced diagnostic workups and ordering all kinds of different laboratory panels. And the most consistent thing that I see in people who report brain fog is they have markers that indicate a problem with their microscopic blood vessels. So the real tiny little perfusing blood vessels that give basically oxygen blood flow to the tissue in the brain are being hyperactivated. The walls of those blood vessels are getting injured by the virus ostensibly, and that's causing things like platelets and clotting factors to become hyperactivated. And pretty early on in the pandemic, when they looked at people who had originally survived viral infection and then later died, but had these symptoms like brain fog and sort of these neurological symptoms, and they did autopsies, they basically found that the blood vessels in the cerebral cortex, basically, which is responsible for your thinking, basically the circulation was all gummed up with platelets. And so that has been sort of the leading theory behind why people experience this. The question is going to be now, is there going to be any safe, effective pharmacological therapy to undo this? And that's going to be the real challenge.
I've checked out some of Julia's reporting and her interview on the committee, which was excellent. Can you describe some more about the symptoms, the clotting, the brain fog, all of this sort of thing?
Yeah, sorry, was that question for me or for Julia?
That's for Julia.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the doctor can probably speak to that better than I can, but I will just say that I think one of the main misconceptions about long COVID is that there are no biomarkers, there's no sort of physical reality to this disease, and it's just not true. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that when a disease is new, it can be hard to diagnose. There were decades where MS was considered to be all in people's heads because they just didn't have MRIs yet. They didn't have the technology to be able to establish what was going on. But for a lot of people who have long COVID, like Dr. Eric was talking about, there are physical changes that we can observe, including a lot of people with long COVID have what's called viral persistence. That means the virus is persisting in your body. It has not cleared from your body. A lot of other viruses can do this. Like if you have HPV, if you have HIV, there are a lot of viruses that you can get infected with and then stay in your body over the long term and can have other effects down the road. There's also endothelial damage, which is, the lining of your blood vessels. And again, that's not something you would necessarily know has happened to you, that the lining of your blood vessels is damaged. I have a friend with long COVID, and she got this treatment like in Germany, where they looked at the microclotting, and her blood, it's like glue, it's tacky. It's full of all of these microclots. And, you have people, including on the left, writing these, questioning reports. Well, is this even real? I mean, her blood is like glue. What do you want me to tell you? I mean, that's a physical, very obviously not psychological. And maybe, part of the reason I'm concerned about it is knowing people that have it and really seeing that physical reality. It's hard to see her because she's so sick all the time. And the way that endothelial damage and microclotting can manifest is severe exhaustion because your organs are not getting blood flow. So that's why you get the fainting when you stand up. That's why you get organs shutting down. That's why you get what's called capillary rarefaction, which is when your little teeny, capillaries that come out from your veins just sort of die because the blood can't flow into them. So, we're talking about a real and a serious disease with underlying organic physiological mechanisms, and we're talking about it like people are crazy. And that's just, the only reason they're getting away with this is that there's just a dedicated narrative in the press that they just do not want people worried about this.
Yeah. So interesting you brought up MS, because one of the most major scientific breakthroughs over the past couple of years is that MS, multiple sclerosis, has been now causally linked to the Epstein-Barr virus. The chronic subsequent effects of the Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV, if people aren't familiar with it, is the causative virus that causes mono in particular. And can be linked to a certain type of lymphoma. But yeah, MS has actually been causally linked to Epstein-Barr virus. So this idea where people are being skeptical or cynical that a virus can cause long-term subsequent serious neuromuscular or sort of chronic inflammatory issues, there's really no basis for that skepticism, because all kinds of viruses have been shown to do that. As far as the theory that there's a persistence of active viral infection, it's very possible, and in some people that may be going on. The trouble with that is most of the research that's showing that is using things like immunohistochemistry, or in some cases RNA-scope, which will detect the presence of viral proteins, but there's not really been what we call whole genome sequencing, which you really need in order to know if you have fully intact replicating virus. What some of my colleagues have been doing, which is pretty fascinating, is they've been using these very cutting edge techniques called proteomics, where they look inside of your immune cells. Your immune cells, after you get infected with a virus, this certain type of immune cell called the monocyte, which is almost like a reconnaissance. It picks up, gobbles up, or eats invading pathogens, and then brings them to your immune system to be processed and recognized. And ordinarily, these things will last for about a week, maybe a few days, maybe a couple of weeks at the longest, and then they go and they die off. And what happens in people with long COVID is that these things become basically like zombies. And instead of committing what we call apoptosis, which is cell suicide, where these things normally die off in about a week or two, you'll find them 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half in some cases, where we look and you still have these zombie monocytes cruising around your immune system, expressing those viral proteins and basically showing them to your blood vessels. And what happens is these things get sticky, these immune cells get sticky, and they adhere to the inner lining of your little microscopic blood vessels, and they cause all kinds of activation and cytokines. And that's what seems to be activating these clotting factors that are causing the buildup of platelets and clots. And that's, I think, really the most cohesive understanding of what is causing the syndrome, where we're putting these different theories together. The trouble now is you've got all these long COVID clinics popping up all over the country. Some of them are at like major academic centers. Some of them just kind of sprout out around. And unfortunately, and people with chronic illness have been going through this for years, where you're kind of stuck between like a medical mainstream that doesn't really acknowledge that your condition is real, and anything that people are trying to do that's maybe a little bit experimental or whatnot, and basically just laughing it off as quackery. But then there are genuine sort of like quacks out there who are offering completely ridiculous, unproven, in some cases dangerous treatments to people without any evidence of benefit, and people are getting harmed. And that's the reason why doing clinical trials is so important. And if you're talking about leftist values, you should care about that as well, because you're talking about disabled people that are just trying to fight for their lives and get their lives back. There's going to be a lot of sort of opportunistic players out there looking to just sort of relieve people of what's in their pockets, offering them nonsense. At the same time, people are being gaslit and told that this is all in their heads, and just kind of go home and do some exercise and you're going to be fine and whatnot. And to me, that's sort of an unfortunate little tightrope these unfortunate people are having to walk. And I do think that's something that that we on the left should care about a lot, whether you're interested in science or not.
One of the things
So,
one of the things I wanted to talk about, because the conflict information is really kind of scary in terms of what you're hearing. The Washington Post had an opinion editorial last week where the title was basically talking about over counting in terms of COVID deaths, and they were literally alleging that there were too many people were being blamed, that too many people were being ascribed to death because of COVID, and their deaths were actually being caused by other reasons, but they were incorrectly being diagnosed as being the cause being COVID. Are you familiar with that article?
Can I talk my shit about that article?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead. I have a few things I want to say too, but if you want to jump in, go ahead.
First of all, that article was very, very well debunked by Mehdi Hassan on his show the next night. And then even today, the Washington Post ran another article that was like, our bad. Sorry, no, they're not being overcounted. But the woman who wrote that article, her name is Dr. Liana Wen, and she is, how do I explain her? She's just a huckster for COVID is no big deal. I mean, this woman has been discredited on multiple things that she said over and over and over again. One of the things she said live on air, on TV, on cable news, she said, well, I don't have my kids wear masks because my son got speech delayed by wearing a mask. Now, I want to be really clear with you that there's no scientific evidence that exists that kids can be speech delayed by masks. Yeah. She may have anecdotally thought that she observed this, but that's not how we do science around here. And after that interview, the American Pediatrics Association did an entire thread just subtweeting her that was like, masks do not cause speech delays. Blind kids don't have speech delays. This is not a thing, one. And, side note, I seriously doubt she was wearing a mask in her house with her like 2-year-old son all the time. I don't think that happened. So no. But that's just one of the times that she's been discredited. I also want to go specifically to this narrative of, oh, well, are they dying of COVID or with COVID? This was a Trump narrative. This was a Republican narrative from day one. And it's really scary seeing how many people on the left just start swallowing this bullshit when it's our side of the aisle that's saying, oh, you know what? Maybe they're just dying with COVID. What's happening is that there's a very, very, very high excess death rate, which is easy to see however you count the COVID deaths. And it started when COVID started. And it just logically doesn't make any sense to be talking about, maybe these deaths are from some other mysterious something else. They're not. They're from COVID. And some of the people who die of COVID in the hospital, it's true, they were there for other reasons and they got infected with COVID. Well, guess what? I think that's a human rights violation. I think that there should be adequate protection in a hospital, that if you or your loved one or your kid or your mom or your dad goes to the hospital and has surgery for cancer, you don't come out with a disease that kills you. I mean, come on. The left isn't talking about this. Right now, I'm seeing it every day. People posting, oh, my brother went in for this surgery and now he has COVID. Are you serious? From the healthcare setting? I mean, this is something we have to handle.
Yeah. So interestingly, Leana Wen actually had a very brief stint as the head of Planned Parenthood some years ago. And she was pretty quickly ousted. And one of her main policy objectives when she was heading up Planned Parenthood is she really wanted to kind of like deprioritize abortion care and make it more like, oh, this is more just like women's health, generalized women's health. And we can see how well the deprioritization of abortion care has turned out. So that's the one thing to know. Another interesting thing about that op-ed in the Washington Post is that her evidence that deaths were being overcounted and it really people are dying with it instead of from it. Oh, I talked to 2 ID doctors at George Washington University Hospital, and this is what they said. Again, that's anecdotes aren't evidence, one. Number 2, I mean no disrespect to infectious disease doctors. They've been 100% vital and crucially important over the past couple of years and always. Research has shown that patients do better when there's infectious disease specialists involved in the care in the hospital, as a matter of fact. But infectious disease doctors don't fill out death certificates, as far as I know. When you get it, I actually fill out death certificates. I'm a hospitalist. I'm your attending of record when you're in the hospital. I actually fill out death certificates. It's very unusual for hospitalized people to go under the actual primary service of an infectious disease doctor. So they're not the ones filling out the death certificates. So I don't even know who she talked to or why they would have said that. I do fill out death certificates, and what I can tell you is that when you fill out a death certificate, you indicate what somebody died from, and you indicate what they died with, and these things are tracked. And so it's just patently untrue. People that specialize in excess deaths have also debunked this. Now, a more complex topic: are we overcounting COVID hospitalizations? And we might actually be doing that, because the way that we go about counting and tracking COVID hospitalizations is a little bit more complex. There was a study published in Open Forums in Infectious Diseases where they try to apply more rigorous criteria for how they defined a COVID hospitalization in the USC LA area, and they found that something like 2/3 of the cases actually wouldn't have met criteria for COVID hospitalization under those more stringent criteria where people needed oxygen, etc. On the other hand, I think we're undercounting hospitalizations of people who got the virus and it caused them to get premature cardiac disease and potentially strokes, myocardial infarctions, people that are ending up hospitalized with those conditions where we aren't able to attribute it to the virus, but it probably is at least some degree causally attributed to having been infected. So I think largely it comes out in the wash. Overall, no, I don't think we are overcounting this. I don't think we are falsely en masse attributing people who just incidentally tested positive, but they came in because they got hit by a car or whatever else, and they're sort of being falsely counted, and that's inflating the numbers. I don't think there's any good evidence to support it. I haven't heard any compelling argument that makes me think that's a big problem.
Well, this goes to my point. How exactly are we expected to have citizens who are lay people, who have no expertise in science, feel any kind of security in what they're being told when a paper of record like the Washington Post is publishing garbage like this and expected to be able to actually see through it?
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. I mean, that's as people on the left. I mean, look, I was 15 when the Iraq War happened, right? And I remember my parents were saying, yeah, this is a war for oil. But you know what? Every single major media outlet was saying, no, it was because Saddam Hussein maybe did 9/11 and also they have WMDs. And you were a conspiracy theorist and you were crazy if you didn't believe that. It's just the same thing. I mean, this is the narrative from the Biden administration. And it's just so funny to me to see so many people on the left trying to, poke holes in this idea that COVID is bad for you because you're just doing favors to Joe Biden. The only person who wants you to think COVID is no big deal is Joe Biden, the Democrats, the Republicans, people who are in power and don't want to do anything about workers dying. Workers are dying. Workers are getting disabled. And as people on the left, no, you shouldn't trust what's coming from the White House. No, you shouldn't trust what's coming from major media outlets that are telling you, you know what? Just go get COVID twice a year. It's going to be fine. No, people are getting disabled by this thing daily. So no, you should not listen to that.
Yeah, I think your broader question, Pascal, is that how are we supposed to have a reputable and effective apparatus of putting out scientific and public health recommendations that people are supposed to listen to? How do we sort of justify that? And I don't have a good answer for that. And I think that is a big problem because this is not going to be the last pandemic that we have. We might have another coronavirus pandemic. We might have another influenza pandemic. I mean, who knows? And there are other public health crises that happen that claim the lives of people that wouldn't have had to been claimed if things were done correctly. And what I've been pointing out from the very first time I ever went on any podcast to talk about COVID, back with David Griscom and Matt Leck and Alicia Brooks, what I said was, when you actually compare different countries and you look at the Global Health Security Index, which is basically a measure of how well different countries are equipped to handle major public health catastrophes, although the United States scored among the highest overall, they look at all these different measures that a country has. Overall, the United States scored very high, but one of the items that the United States scored very poorly on was the extent to which the general public trusts public institutions, whether it's public health communication, just public institutions in general. And I think it's very easy to get mad at sort of the anti-science aggressors, anti-vaccine community, whatever else. But as Julia has aptly pointed out, a lot of it has come from mainstream, otherwise reputable institutions that we're supposed to be listening to. And I don't really know how that gets fixed, unfortunately. I don't have an answer to that. It's very concerning.
Very. We have a super chat here from On Your Left. Are there tests for long COVID? How do you differentiate between long COVID and brain fog caused by stress / burnout?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any answers?
Very difficult to do. Right now, there are not what I would call widely accepted tests that within the general medical community are going to be accepted as, here's a test for long COVID, do you have it or not? There are lots of different diagnostic tests and algorithms that are being put out. I'm very excited that an algorithm that my research group is working with is on the verge of actually being FDA approved as a diagnostic modality for actually being able to diagnose long COVID. In the U.S. and in the EU and Europe, this particular testing modality received the CE-IVD, which basically allows it to be legally marketed as a long COVID test, and it's being run by one of the largest, most reputable labs in the European Union. It's basically equivalent to like LabCorp or Quest in the United States, called SynLab. And it's basically an array of different cytokines that we look at, and they use these artificial intelligence, machine learning driven algorithms to basically try to differentiate either health controls, people who have long COVID, or potentially other chronic illnesses. So these things are in development. There's no firm answer right now, but the research is very rapidly moving forward. And so, yeah, and you know, and to answer the second part of that question, for me to tell someone, oh, your brain fog is just from stress, or it's in your head, or it's sort of a functional problem, that's tough to do. I mean, that's really a diagnosis of exclusion once everything else has been sort of ruled out. So yeah, that's the best I can answer that question.
We'll take it.
Well, on that note, it's getting late, and the doctor and Julia are going to join us in the champagne room. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. I want to see what's going on in the champagne
Don't be
room.
so excited, you guys. You just
Jason's going to strip for us.
Oh,
Jason,
God.
what?
This is going to strip for us in the champagne room.
I'm not gonna. Not today.
He's going to strip
Maybe.
emotionally.
That's only for our off-air conversations.
Okay.
But I think we're going to open up the phone lines for the champagne room.
Nice.
So I'm excited for this. We're only going to have them open for a little bit because, as you know, we have to save our phone line money for the Valentine's Day show.
Oh, that's right.
We can't blow the entire phone line budget on you guys yelling at us, calling us quacks. We have to save that for you guys yelling about weird love lines type questions.
Mm-hmm.
How about maybe in the champagne room, Jason can do the Wednesday Addams dance.
Pay to see that.
Was that in the champagne room, or was that on a private call where I stood on the chair and then did the Shakira when I had little shorts on? You didn't believe I was wearing little shorts.
That and the time you fell off the chair. Hilarious.
That was on camera, right? Julia's like,
were.
what the shit?
Yeah.
I don't believe in long shorts, Julia.
I have no strong opinion.
Don't scare the guests, Jason. Don't
You're
scare
gonna wear shorts, you wear shorts, okay? You people call them hot pants. I call them shorts. Proper clothes for a hot day. That's it. We're moving on to the champagne room where we'll be taking your calls. Pascal, are you staying for the call taken in the champagne room?
Yeah, man, I'm here, man. I'm part of the team, dude.
Toussaint, are you ready to screen some calls?
I'm ready to do it.
Oh man,
Let's
Dr.
get
Eric,
it.
are you ready to take some love line style calls? We should practice the love lines thing in the champagne room.
Why not?
With Dr. Eric.
Yeah, well, but I actually went on Dr. Drew's podcast last year.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, since then, he has taken a very unfortunate turn, and the type of stuff he's putting out there and the kind of guests he's having on are pretty insane. But
Yeah,
it's still kind of cool to go on there.
that is cool.
People are talking about the champagne room in the chat. Steve says, I'm a proud munch. And Robert Booth says, what up, munch, is his new way to say hello.
Okay, let's just hop in.
Cool.
Let's go. Okay, on that note, guys, we are
Out.